Hey, I'm Rachael.
And I'm Amanda, and this is Beyond a Ballot.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Beyond a Ballot podcast. I'm Rachael Siegel here with Amanda Alvaro. How are you?
Hi, so good. So good to be here today.
All right, so the top story that seems to be happening in Canada this week is home heating oil.
Who knew?
Has anyone heard that term used around here?
Who knew this was going to be the story? And it's been such a big story, and we've been talking about it for a full week. Home heating oil. So let's break it down.
Let's break it down. We thought we would just touch on this because it's something that everybody that works in politics, that lives and breathes politics, is talking about. But now it's starting to be common narrative in Canada. And so I'll give you background and then we can dive in. Mm-hmm. Basically, what happened was that the federal Liberals said they were willing to give Atlantic Canadians a tax break on home heating oil, which is primarily used. It is used across the country, but primarily used in Atlantic Canada. And so then the big story was that one of the ministers, federal ministers, made a comment on a TV program saying that the Atlantic Canadian Caucus, so the members of the Liberal caucus that are from Atlantic Canada, had really advocated for this position. And the controversy over this position is that obviously it affects one province or one area over another. So the Western premiers came out and said, hey, what about us? Why don't we get a tax break on the carbon tax in our provinces? And once this minister that was on TV had made the comment that they had advocated for it, a lot of people were questioning, well, where are my politicians advocating for me? And so that has left us in this position where we are now debating whether or not the federal government can make adjustments to things like the carbon tax that affects one province or one region and not others. Is that pretty?
So a couple of things about it. So if you know about the carbon tax, which of course you do, otherwise known as carbon pricing, then
Depends
you know
who you
that
ask.
it's a cornerstone of the Liberals' election platform. It's a key part of their environmental policy. And so this carve-out was an issue for a couple of reasons. But let's talk about the carve-out for a second. The reason why it's really sensible policy, like the reason why they addressed home heating oil, is because it's polluting, it's expensive, and it disproportionately affects lower income Canadians. So while we've talked about it in the country as an Atlantic province, and true, it does disproportionately affect Atlantic Canadians, it wasn't just for Atlantic Canadians.
Fair.
40% were in Quebec, 20% in Ontario, 20% in the West. So there is disbursement across the country. It was politicized as an Atlantic Canada issue for the reasons that Rachael shared. But the policy itself affects Canadians across the country. The problem is that when you take a carve-out on a very key part of the platform of the election or of the environmental policy, it really starts to feel like a bit of a concession. That maybe this is not just a sustainability or a climate change issue, it is an affordability issue.
Well, and
that's
when your
where the great
ministers
debate happened.
When your minister comes out and says you should elect more Liberals, which I believe is similar to almost word for word what she said.
Yes, that was unfortunate.
It really is an unfortunate statement because it made people question, I think, the sanctity of the policy itself, the carbon tax. And it's something that not all Canadians are sold on. And the actual benefit of carbon tax, like go to any Canadian and say, can you describe to me what the carbon tax is? I was looking it up yesterday and it's complicated. It's a complicated policy and a lot of people, support the environment. They are willing to pay it, but they don't know why they're paying it or where it's going or what's going on with it. So when you say, first of all, when she degraded it by saying elect more Liberals, it made it a partisan issue, but also to say, sure, we're going to get rid of this environmental policy on one area, but not others. Right. You start to question, is this something that works, or is it not?
Yeah. And it was really interesting also when you look at polling of like the key issues that Canadians really care about right now. And the environment was a top 3, climate change was a top 3 issue for a number of years. It has dropped. It's still in the top 10, but it has dropped significantly. And the reason why that is because, affordability issues have taken precedence because Canadians are feeling the crunch right now because it's, and so when you start equating these carve outs to affordability, that's when it gets really tricky to defend the entire policy. And I think we talked about it a lot this week because, it really opened a door or a window for the Conservative Party to come through, so much so that Poilievre started talking this week about the next election being a carbon tax election. Actually coined it that way. So if you're listening to this, we promise you're going to be hearing so much more about the carbon tax or carbon pricing, depending on who you're talking to, what it means for the environment and what it means for our pocketbooks.
And then I guess we'll see if that we're running on that ballot question, if we're going to have a carbon pricing / tax election in 2025.
Or before.
I don't know. Maybe after this week, it'll be before. Okay.
That's it.
We're going to come right back with our panel. Stay tuned. So, Amanda, I don't know about you, but for the last couple of weeks in Canadian politics, it seems to be like the major question that keeps arising is the relationship between the federal government and the provinces, including who has jurisdiction over what and whether you can apply federal laws to one province but not another. And that's my nerdy specialty, is the relationship there. So I'm excited about this.
There have been a lot of battles over the last few weeks in particular. So we thought the best thing to do to have a conversation like this is to have a dinner party. This is the second episode that we've done like this. We had a lot of feedback, a lot of great feedback from the first one. The idea is, let's call out to some brilliant women that we know who love to talk politics, and we'll have a dinner party. The weird part about this is that there isn't actually any dinner. So we have to solve that part of the equation. But
we got to figure that one out for the next one.
But we're so excited because we have an incredible group here with us today. Let me take a second to introduce everyone. Ginny Roth from Crestview Strategies. They're going to talk a little bit about themselves as well. So I'm not going to say much except name, where they're from. Sally Housser from Canadian Strategy Group, and Sarah Elder-Chamanara from Madam Premier and the host of Elected podcast. Welcome, everyone.
Hello.
Hi.
Nice to be here.
Okay, so here we are together, but physically, we are all actually in different provinces, except for Ginny and Amanda, who are in Ontario. But I'm in BC. Sarah is in Alberta. Sally, we never know where you are, but I'm told that today you're in Saskatchewan, your home province. And Ginny and Amanda, like I said, are in Ontario. So we did this on purpose because we thought that it would be cool to have each of us based in a different province, and so that we can have specific conversations about the provinces themselves and where they're at when it comes to their relationship with the federal government right now. Not that we're expecting you to be provincial, geniuses, although I'm sure you all are, but just for the audience to know that we're physically across Canada, except for Atlantic Canada. Sorry, we probably should have included them.
I'm originally from Newfoundland, so I will represent the the Atlantic provinces for the purposes of this conversation.
We've got it. Thank you, Sally. So why don't we start by introducing yourself and talking about your connection to politics? How did you get involved? Let's start with Ginny. We'll go east-west.
It's very nice to be here. As you mentioned, I'm in Toronto, which is where I grew up, although I did go to university in Halifax. So I feel like I have... Excellent. And the Atlantic politics bubble is small. Like you can be a big fish in a small pond there, so I feel like I really got a feeling actually for Atlantic politics while I was there. And while I was there, I got really deep into like conservative campus politics, which is as cool as you can imagine. But exactly as cool as you would picture it being. And I loved that. But then I moved back to Toronto. I got involved in Ontario politics, Ontario Conservative politics. I was at Queen's Park and working on campaigns basically through all the Tim Hudak years, which if you don't remember Tim Hudak, that's okay. He never became premier. But I worked in opposition, which if anyone is thinking about getting into politics who's listening to this podcast, opposition is like the best place to cut your teeth. You have to do everything. You have to be a generalist. You're kind of like fighting a knife fight every day. Yeah. And it really got me hooked on politics. I really loved it. And then some people that I met on campaigns, I realized like, oh, you can do this for a living. Like you can have a career in politics where you don't have to be a political staffer forever and outgrow it and move on. And I got into consulting and I just totally fell in love with it. And I love doing strategy. I love staying involved in politics and then using that to give advice to private sector people and people in the not-for-profit universe and all of that. And so I've been a consultant for a decade. And I take brief pauses to work on campaigns here and there. I just worked on Pierre Poilievre's leadership campaign, which was a total blast. And I'm sure we'll get into that at some point, but that's me. That's my politics.
That's awesome. Sally, we'll go to you next.
Sure. I actually kind of came to politics proper a little later in life. I didn't have my first job with the NDP until I was nearly 30. I spent 5 years at the Canadian High Commission in London, England, prior to coming back to Newfoundland, where I got my first job with Jack Harris, a fabulous member of Parliament. I'm from there, worked for Jack Layton. Then the previous, I used to say kind of the Manitoba NDP government, but now I have to specify that it was the last one and not the current one. I've been a press secretary to Rachael Notley as well, and chief of staff here in Saskatchewan. But I when I said I came to it late, at least I guess that's partisan politics. I was actually a page in the House of Commons my first year of university, and for those listening who don't know, it's one of those kids you see sit in front of the speakers and. I mean, before Blackberries and stuff, we used to run actual notes, but now I guess it's just kind of getting water and stuff like that. But anyways, I've lived all across the country. I've had the benefit of attending some First Ministers meetings, Council of the Federation with the previous Manitoba Premier, previous NDP Manitoba Premier. Really jazzed to talk about the intersection because I've worked at both the federal and provincial levels. And I think it's that kind of partnership is something that perhaps isn't talked about enough. And particularly these big First Ministers meetings and what come out of them.
Yeah, that's a good point. Ooh, I want to come back to that and touch on that. Sarah, tell us about you.
Hi, I'm Sarah Elder-Chamanara, and as mentioned, I'm here in Calgary, Alberta. I'm originally from BC, so the other end of the coast. Rachael and I share a home province. Yes, the West Coast is the best coast.
It's true.
Yeah. I am a former political staffer as well for the former BC Liberal Party, now called the BC United Party. Where I worked in caucus and then for different ministers. And then 11 years ago, I happened to move to Alberta, a place where I never imagined myself settling. But I've been here now for a long time. And when I first moved to Alberta, I actually moved to Fort McMurray and received instant offers of joining the then Progressive Conservative Party of Alberta. And I politely declined on the basis that they were not fiscally conservative enough. And have pretty much remained out of politics for the most part for most of the time that I've lived here, until I decided that to focus on women and electing women and advocating for women in politics, specifically having seen the lack of representation myself as a staffer and been in those rooms where sometimes you're the only woman, or maybe your minister's also a woman, but that's maybe just the two of you, and there needs to be more of us. So I started Madam Premier using fashion as a way to advocate for women in politics. And it's grown. And now I have a store front here in Calgary, as well as selling across the country. Everyone from senators to ministers to, it's in a lot of different podcast hosts. It's in
I was saying that 90% of my wardrobe is Madam Premier, and shockingly, I'm not wearing it today. I'm kicking myself. I was in my politics sweater yesterday by Madam Premier. Nice. So, political clothing for women to support women, phenomenal. I love it.
Yeah, and from a multi-partisan approach, because I don't think it's the job of any one party to elect women, and each party comes at it differently. That is a bit of a thorny spot, though, in terms of being intersectional, but it's something that I'm learning to deal with. But yeah, I'm excited about the conversation we're going to have. And I feel like I should say, hi, the problem, it's me, Alberta, over here as the...
We didn't want to point fingers, but I guess...
As, you know, we're the troublemaker right now in the Canadian political landscape.
Yeah, we're going to dive into that.
All right. Okay, well, let's start then. Let's get into this conversation.
You ready?
Maybe the first question we'll ask is if someone can explain how the federal-provincial relationship should work. Because I think a lot of people they're confused about like what. There's a lot of rumbling.
Everyone's like, please don't pick
pretty
me.
Angry out there, but how should this relationship work? One of you?
Well, I'll just give a legal tirade while we're waiting for everyone to think about that question. But we do have federal paramountcy in this country. So typically when two laws are enacted, one's federal and one's provincial, the federal government law is what takes precedent. But also based on so many of our agreements, including federation, there's different relationships that have been negotiated between the provinces and the federal government. Was that enough time?
That was good.
For somebody to...
maybe I'll like pick up where you left off.
Okay, thank you.
I think it's useful to talk about it in practice and how you know, and healthcare is I think an amazing example. We have a norm in Canada that the federal government collects taxes and distributes a lot of money back to the provinces in order to pay for healthcare. And you know, I think that's a really good example of where there's a formal agreement and an informal agreement. You know, we have the Canada Health Act. There's sort of an expectation on the part of the federal government that there are some strings attached to that money and that people have a right to public health care in Canada. But how far that extends and how you interpret that is a serious matter of debate. There are ideological questions there about access. There have been legal challenges on the part of people who want a right to healthcare, feel they actually can't access it in the public market and therefore pursue a private option. And then people who push back from the other side and say, no, everyone has an equal guarantee to public healthcare and that system needs to be augmented if people don't have access to it. And so as soon as you get into like a nitty gritty example, or take another like newer example where if you had, 5 years ago, if someone had said, oh, you won't have federal cabinet ministers and party leaders talking about housing, like that's ridiculous. Like it's municipal, it's maybe a bit provincial. And yet here we are, the public is demanding housing and politicians at the federal level feel like they have got to have something to say about it. And so when they look at their policy bucket, it's like, well, they have carrots, they have sticks, they collect a lot of money and redistribute it to municipalities to spend on things. Well, maybe if we can hold back some of that spending to kind of get you to do something we want you to do, like build housing, maybe that will get you to do it. So a lot of this is like creative politics on the part of politicians, trying to appeal to voters and finding ways to do that, frankly, regardless of what the technical sort of jurisdiction is that the issue sits in. So that was a lot, but I think
that was very well said.
Great explanation.
How it's playing out for everyone.
Yeah. Anyone else want to jump in there?
Just in terms of, it was great to start us off with the kind of the legality, Rachel, and how things should work and where the responsibilities lie. But when we talked about, the self-interest by its very nature of politicians of getting reelected, and anybody here, and I imagine all of us have knocked on doors before, and the lack of distinction people have between federal politicians, municipal politicians, you go get on the doorstep and you want to be talking about either federal issues or provincial issues, and people are like, yeah, just fix my fucking potholes, there's that lack of it. And so that's where you get the federal government talking about housing, or even getting into the national child care agreement, how it should work. There should be a natural tension between the provinces and the federal government. Naturally, when you look at political stripes, sometimes you'll have provincial premiers that are more aligned with the federal government. Other times, in the case of here in Saskatchewan and in Alberta, where you use the federal government as a real foil. They're your opposition as opposed to your actual opposition in the province, which is tremendously effective. As I said, I'm from Newfoundland, and I do remember Danny Williams taking the Canadian flag down, and despite being a conservative, getting into a pretty significant scrap with Stephen Harper. And that's a great way when you're down in the polls provincially to start a fight with the feds. It works well politically, particularly when you're not in Ontario. When you're in the regions, Newfoundland, Saskatchewan, the Atlantic provinces, because being able to sell that, what I always refer to as Upper Canada, Quebec and Ontario, don't understand what you are facing as the province. And so I think you have that natural tension. I think what we see right now is perhaps a fracturing of the relationship in recent years. Particularly with Saskatchewan and Alberta, really flexing their muscles, and Alberta on the Alberta pension plan. It seems as, the asymmetrical federalism that is Canada, a tad more dysfunctional than it has been, and certainly in the kind of the 20 plus years I've been paying attention.
Asymmetrical federalism. I'm going to have to think about that one. I like that. Sarah, what do you think?
Well, I'm going to come at this at a slightly different way. So I think about it as on an individual basis. So I don't, when I travel outside of the country, I don't start by saying, I'm from Alberta or I'm from BC. I say I'm from Canada. And so I'm Canadian first and foremost, no matter if I was born in Alberta or if I was born in BC or, anywhere else in Canada. And I think that my expectation as a Canadian, first and foremost, is that the services that I contribute to through my taxes, at whatever level that may be, is that I am taken care of. And so, the distinction, I think, honestly, we need to do a better job of educating people in school, which would be a provincial responsibility, around the different levels of government and what they're responsible for, and how, all of this kind of citizenship, democracy kind of things, because I think it's honestly a failure of our government and our education system that people don't understand more about the different levels of government and how they interact and what they're responsible for. And so, no matter where you're from, I think that, people just nowadays have an expectation that when you turn on the tap, the faucet, the water comes out. And when you touch the button, your heat comes on. But, to Sally's point, the relationship with the federal government can be different based on provinces, which province you're in. And Alberta, my new home province of 11 years, loves to make the federal government their main dueling partner. Whether that's productive or not, and to the benefit of Albertans, is obviously subjective. I'm sure the UCP would say that it's working great for them. But, in terms of how that works for the average Albertan, I really don't see the value in that, because I think it actually does a disservice to, people rank politicians at the lowest, they have the lowest popularity. They're considered lower than lawyers in terms of respectability.
No offense to lawyers.
Oh no!
And sorry, lawyers and cards. Even it's really bad. They're at the bottom of the list. And so, coming from a place of wanting more women and people to be in politics, really good people who are smart and educated and come from all different walks of life and have all kinds of life experiences. I want people to understand politics more and the differences between governments and the levels of governments, but I want them to feel that, there's a higher level of discourse and that they want to be a part of it. And unfortunately, I think where we're at right now is that it's turning a lot of people off.
Yeah. So the world of federal-provincial relationship lives legally in our Constitution in Section 91 and 92, which Amanda and I actually talked about it on a different episode because it's my favorite thing to talk about, apparently. But that outlines who's responsible for which area of government. So we talked about healthcare. That's a shared responsibility in different ways. But how much does taxation play into the relationship between the federal government? I'm thinking about Alberta, And, during when they were booming and oil money was coming in and they were paying astronomical amounts of money to the federal government, how does that work in terms of leveraging provincial need on the federal stage?
Well, if I can jump in on this one first, I'm going to put on my Alberta grievance hat on temporarily.
And I think you're going to be putting it on a lot.
Only fair.
Yeah.
Fair. And someone's got to speak for them.
Yeah. And say that I don't think we get the credit we deserve in terms of being an economic engine for the entire country. We're kind of looked at as kind of, this backwater where, significant wealth is generated here that benefits not only Alberta, but Ottawa and the federal government, but also the wealth gets transferred, people who fly in and fly out, for example, and take that wealth back to St. John's, to Newfoundland, to New Brunswick, to Nova Scotia, to BC. It goes all over the country. And so I feel like if there was more acknowledgement on the part of the federal government about the significance that Alberta plays in contributing to the Canadian economy, I think that would take a little bit of the wind out of the sails of the UCP in that combativeness of, recognize me. I'm here. Like, give me attention. So I think that would go a long ways in that relationship.
I think the taxation piece gets to almost like a philosophical question that I think is worth just dwelling on a little bit, which is, and it's not really a partisan line question, because I think you can make a left-wing or a right-wing argument on kind of either side of it. There are public policy benefits to taxing a big pool of people and then using that money for big things that help all of those people. Like railways across the entire country, like the kinds of big projects that actually like create a country and make a country work require you to be able to tax people. Having a military so that if we ever get attacked, we can defend ourselves. Like, there are big national projects that require us to tax a big pool of people. On the other hand, there's this concept called subsidiarity, which is kind of a conservative concept, although not always, which is the more localized you can make a taxation pool, and the more like local and small control you can give over a small group of people that you've taxed to decide for themselves how that money is spent, the better it will be spent. Like, if you've got a really small community that wants to all put in some money to build a community center, that's going to satisfy a lot of people, because they will have sort of like willingly contributed to a pool of money to be spent on something that's going to locally really benefit them. And I think so much of our federalism debate comes down to like how big the pool is, what it gets spent on, how much control you get in exchange for the tax dollars that have been collected on your behalf. And this give and take between this need to have national projects and this need to have local control. And that's, I think, a big part of where the Alberta grievance comes from. Every province has their own character a little bit, and they all would maybe make different choices about how they'd spend that money. Maybe some provinces would say, sure, take my money, take my money and redistribute it, but I want to give it to my mother to take care of my kids, not a childcare center, and so that prescriptiveness of that federal program doesn't work for that province or those people. And so I think that's a lot of where the philosophical debates come from that play out in real life politics.
Yeah. It's, this is a common refrain you'll find from premiers or ministers when you have that, those discussions at the federal, provincial level of, we want more money for healthcare, we want more money for education, but we do not want you to tell us what to do with it. And from the federal government's point of view, and this goes back to the idea of federalism is that there is some standard and consistency across provinces across the country. And so they're saying, okay, well, if we give you this amount more money, it has to go to this instead of just going to your general revenue and you spend it on whatever. Right. So that is, that's an age-old debate between certainly ministers of finance and the federal minister of finance. And a lot of this isn't new, particularly, as Sarah was talking about Alberta and that recognition and being the economic driver. This goes back to, the National Energy Program and Trudeau Sr. back in the 70s of, we can't get no respect here, essentially. So that's not a new thing that's emerged in Alberta. I would argue that it's probably a relatively significant part of the culture in that respect.
What did they say?
The West wants in. The West wants in, right?
Yeah.
So in terms of taxation, this all goes back to the same thing of people going, well, I'm not getting my tax dollars worth, essentially. And, here we are, we've got two people in Ontario. We don't have anybody in Quebec here, but naturally one of the largest bitches from Alberta, and I would say equally from Newfoundland and other provinces, is why does Quebec get to, get all this money, and they get to choose how they spend it on health, and they get to choose how they spend it on. They have much more control, and that's the unique position of Quebec within the Federation, which is often a sticking point.
You've mentioned things like the obvious dueling partner or the natural opposition between the provinces and the feds. Feels like it's been extra feisty lately. Do you agree? Is the temperature turning, or is the tone changing? And if so, why?
I have to say, and this is more kind of, I don't know, analytical of the vibe, I guess, which, in the parlance of our time. But the announcement for the energy home heating carve out for Atlantic Canada went down like a fucking lead balloon. It was not, just putting my comms hat on. The rollout
Tell
was
us what happened.
Double plus.
What happened?
And that, I think, what we see is the federal government, I think, losing control a little bit.
What happened with the carbon tax?
For those, we've the Liberals, their signature piece of the carbon tax, has been a huge one. But they had Atlantic members of Parliament saying, like, this is not going over well. We're going to lose our shirts. We're going to lose our seats over this. And so the federal government came out and said, well, for those kind of using home heating oil, you'll get a break on the taxes you pay. And it's really hard to make that argument for federalism and equality across the country when you have, this one region who's getting this break. And it was not helped by a liberal minister, essentially saying, and, this is the quiet part loud, well, for criticism of like, well, what about the West? Well, where's the break for the senior in Western Canada? And then saying essentially, well, elect more liberal. The Atlantic Caucus was really vocal on this one. And so, if you want a voice at the table, elect more liberals. So it really, right. I mean, you have to, that a policy and your comms plan is not good when you have the NDP premiers of Wab Kinew, David Emy, the Conservative premiers of Danielle Smith and Scott Moe, and also their oppositions, all agreeing that this is garbage for anywhere west of Ontario. So right. I think that's kind of a symptom and demonstrates a little bit of a flailing on the part of the federal government. Usually it's kind of getting everybody in a room. Sometimes you make side deals with provinces like they did on childcare, but largely you want to get everybody in the room and saying, listen, we've got, both the carrot and the stick here. You got to play ball. It doesn't feel like that level of control is being exerted by the federal government at the moment.
Can I tell you all what my dream is right now?
Yeah,
like one of my many dreams. I want to be invited to a federal Liberal caucus meeting. And I want to tell everyone how bad of a job they're doing right now in terms of communicating with the public.
Ouch.
Yeah. No, but honestly, I don't feel like I don't know what kind of advice they're getting, but like, it's not good. It's just not good. And the fact that Judy Hutchings said the quiet part out loud, which was, they should elect more liberals. Well, I'm sorry. But, whether someone voted for you or not, you're the leader of the entire country. You don't get a pass just because we didn't happen to elect more federal Liberal MPs here in Alberta or in Saskatchewan or in Manitoba. And so to see all of the premiers, including, to Sally's point, Wab Kinew, who, the newly elected NDP premier in Manitoba, like the federal Liberals have lost the plot in terms of like their house is in disarray. And I think it was this morning I saw on the news that there's legislation that was from the confidence and supply agreement with the federal NDP around anti-scab legislation. I just see this as a way of buying time because they all, I've said this before, that I feel like there's a scent of death in terms of the federal Liberals, and that the writing is on the wall that the federal Conservatives are going to win in a landslide across the entire country.
Okay, that was very clear.
Maybe I'll jump in and
let Ginny talk about that. Okay.
I don't know that I'll defend the Liberals, but I think, like Sally used a word, which is that this is a symptom. And I think it's a symptom of tough times. Like when you think about federalism, there have been periods of time where actually the downside of federalism, of the dynamic between the feds and the provinces, has been actually buck passing, like passing on opportunities, like trying not to take the ball, trying not to like claim a policy area, because and that tends to happen, I think, when times are good. Because governments try to avoid risk, right? Like they don't want to, if times are good, governments generally want to avoid doing things. They want to kind of just coast on the good times and hopefully fade into the background and have people not pay too much attention to them. When times start to get bad, when inflation is on the rise, when like crime seems to, urban issues seem to be arising and people's kind of like lived experience in urban centers isn't so great. They feel like there are addiction issues, there's crime everywhere. Like there's this sense of things are not good, things are ungood, as Sally put it. And I think that like also we're at, I think, the natural endpoint of a government that's served for a relatively long period of time over the span of Canadian history. And so all those things coming together, I think, pretty symptomatic of a bigger problem. And it's the federal government facing down really tough times, and a lot of provincial leaders seeing a really easy punching bag in the federal government. And those fights are not always bad. I mean, they can alienate people, certainly, especially when politicians are acting in bad faith and trying to like stir up grievances for the sake of winning an election. But if those fights are over legitimate public policy questions that we haven't sorted out, that need to be sorted out, like I think housing is a really good one. The feds and the provinces passed the buck on housing for years because it was such a tough policy issue. No one wanted to own that or run at it.
Right.
And then some flip switched when the demand for housing just got so intense and it became clear that young people were going to vote with their feet. Like if you pull millennials and Gen Z on housing, it's like the issue. And if you can't be seen to be solving it, it's a real problem for you and it becomes a risk. And so now all of a sudden it's a fight over who gets to get credit for building houses and who has the best plan to build housing. So federalism, the dynamic can depend on how the economy is doing, how well things are going or how poorly things are going, and whether governments want to like run at a solution or run away from a problem.
Ginny, I want to stick with you for a minute because there's a question that I've circled around a few times, and it's the very interesting and fascinating relationship between the Ontario government and the feds, particularly around Premier Doug Ford and how he has approached his relationship with the federal government. Can you talk about that for a minute? What do you make of that relationship?
Well, if anyone's heard him talk about Minister of Finance and Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland, it's like he's in love with her. It's like he has a crush on her.
Totally,
it's hilarious. The way he talks about her, it's almost cute. Like it's almost like this endearing dynamic that they have. And I think it just speaks to what kind of politician he is. He's not ideological. He is a populist. He thinks his like political mission is to like get things done for people and cut deals. And, one of the most productive versions of federalism from a political and a public policy perspective is collaborating on infrastructure development, building things. Lately, the way that's looked between Ontario and the feds has been not even on the private sector or on the private sector side, not infrastructure, but economic development and using incentives funded by taxpayers to try to spur economic development, like in autonomous vehicles and batteries for vehicles and using critical minerals to spur manufacturing in southwestern Ontario, all sorts of political upside to that because people perceive it as creating jobs, as boosting the economy. Mm-hmm. And it's not terribly ideological. Clearly, the Ford conservatives and the federal liberals think they can like both show up to a ribbon cutting and announcement mm-hmm. and shake hands and look like they're working together and crossing party lines to like deliver results for people in Ontario. And it makes for an interesting dynamic. I mean, I think the Ford conservatives are sort of closer and interested in being close to the federal liberals than they are to the federal conservatives, who are quite a bit more ideological and have totally different priorities. And so we've seen these dynamics before. There have been moments of tension, certainly, but there have also been periods of collaboration where you had a liberal government in the province and a conservative government federally, you know, after the recession, when the federal conservatives were rolling out all kinds of infrastructure investment, you know, provinces were kind of racing to the table to be part of those ribbon cuttings too, right? Everyone wants to be seen to be putting a shovel in the ground to like build a new hospital or a new, you know, subway station or something.
Sarah, do you think that some of the other provinces could take a page from the Doug Ford playbook on how to have a stronger relationship?
Yeah. I tell people who come into the store all the time from Ontario, we end up talking, like we talk politics with everyone, honestly. And when I meet people from Ontario and they're like, and they don't really understand what's going on here in Alberta, and I'm like, I would love for Doug Ford to be my premier, because of the very complicated political landscape and my own very complicated personal politics stuff. And I like politicians who get shit done. I like shovels in the ground, and I see Doug Ford being someone who can maybe work with everybody, and I really respect that, and I think that's a winning approach. You know, I think what was it? Get it done. Was that his campaign slogan or something? I can't remember now. Right. But it was something. Yeah, it was like, but it was so simple and so easy and so understandable. And I think that's what people want, is literally to get it done. And what I think is so frustrating about politics right now is that there's so much, the back and forth of it is like, you know, it's just time and energy wasted. I did want to mention something, because I was recently in BC going back to the taxation point, because I was in BC and it had been a while since I had been there, and I was like, wow, you guys have really, really nice stuff. And
stuff being buildings.
Yes, infrastructure and transit
and mountains. We have nice mountains.
Well, yeah, and the moisture is great for my skin. And like, it's just, you know, there's a lot of, you can see the investment, right? And in contrast with Alberta, where I would say we don't have much on the infrastructure side, which personally drives me crazy. But it's also because we don't have a provincial sales tax here in Alberta. We only have a GST. So we only pay 5%. We're not paying 10 plus. And so we don't have the money in that traditional revenue stream that other provinces do to put into other things. So, you know, but anyways, I just wanted to mention BC and all of the nice things that you have. But
thank you.
I feel like
Doug Ford's approach to politics, in my opinion, is a winning one.
Okay, I want to dive in.
Sorry. I feel like I can't, in good conscience, leave the Doug Ford loving unanswered here.
Yeah.
Folks.
I should have known that.
Yeah, you know, it's great to put a shovel in the ground when you do it corruptly and with backroom deals and payola and whatnot, and the taxpayers actually getting screwed. You know, but can people take a page out of Ford's book? This is where they're different provinces. They're different provinces. They have different infrastructure needs, political needs, electoral needs. I don't see what, you know, Doug Ford's method, if you know, you argue that it's working, which I would, you know, perhaps argue a different way, is not going to work for the same people. It's different provinces. He's different also personality wise. They're different persons, different people. Just going back to the infrastructure, one thing that I think it's important to talk about kind of in terms of the cross country and the taxation, we're getting away from a country that does big nation building things. There simply isn't the political appetite
Yes.
for it. And the fractured media environment, saying that this is going to cost several $1 billion and we're going to have something that emerges in 20 years is increasingly hard to sell. From an electoral point of view, we have 4-year election cycles saying like we're going to put X amount of money for something that is going to be good in 20 years from now. And so I think that that's part of the fracturing, because we're looking political, like vote by vote, seat by seat. And there isn't that kind of public appetite for big things. The price tag is too shocking to people.
If I could make it like a sort of, I don't think it's a counter argument, but like if I could add to that a little bit, I think people want us to build big things. And I think there's an openness to being patient and even frankly to ponying up for the cost of it. But we have become like mired in barriers to building. I obviously have an ideological view of what that looks like, but frankly, I think that there's even a non-ideological take on that. Like there's too much red tape. I think there's frankly just too much consultation, or consultation that's not actually consultative, but is meant to block things and slow things down. There is regulation and process, and our public service, for whatever reason, just can't seem to deliver against timelines and execute. And that, I think, is a problem that people are, it's one of these public policy problems that no one wants to run at. And back to that question of running at and running away from, no one wants to run at it because it's tough. Like, I think it's a real problem. But I don't know that I think the public wants it. I blame our officials and our institutions that are supposed to be building things. And I think it's something that we have to sort out, because frankly, and this is like maybe getting a little bit too intense, but I think we're losing our connection to Canada as a country, because those big Canadian projects are a big part of what used to unite us. And the more that we don't have them, the more we become just these fractured regions who fight over money and control.
Totally.
Well, here's like, I feel like I'm waiting for the next generation of politician in Canada to paint Canadians a broad vision of what our potential and possibility is in a new Canadian context. And I don't see anyone doing that. And I feel like that's a huge void, to your point, Ginny, because no one is talking about like, or even talking about, a Canada that we, can envision in the future, right? It's all this bickering back and forth, and you're doing this, I don't like this. You're doing this, I don't like this. Freedom, whatever, other freedom, hunters, carbon tax, all of these, all these different things. And no one's painting people a vision, right? Especially coming out of COVID and, with healthcare and education being top of mind, I think, for a lot of people across the country. There's just so much negativity. And I feel like, for anyone who's out there, like, come into Canadian politics, and paint a vision for people, because like there needs to be some kind of level of positivity, of a talk about building things, about bringing people together, like moving on from division. I think there's a huge void in the market right now, and I really hope someone that jumps into it that can do that.
Okay, we're running out of time here, but I want to get into specific policies with a few minutes left from each of your provinces. So I'm going to highlight them. For example, this week we saw in Alberta a major healthcare announcement. So we'll touch on that for you, Sarah, and we're going to come back to you. Ginny, it wasn't this week, but, Doug Ford's relationship with the federal government will be what I'm looking to you for. And then Sally, Scott Moe has done many things with his relationship with the federal government. And so as three people who are fully engaged in politics, what would your advice be to your individual premiers when it comes to maybe this week we also saw the premiers meeting with Chrystia Freeland in Ottawa. What would your advice be to them in terms of your position, your province's position, and your message to the federal government at this point?
Do you want me to start there? Or, as you said, Scott Moe's done a lot of things. I honestly, I think at this point, with a provincial election coming up within the year, I don't think there's a lot to repair that can be repaired with the federal government at the moment, nor do I believe that is what Scott Moe wants. With a relatively new opposition NDP leader here, they've been unable to paint Carla Beck, the leader of the NDP here in Saskatchewan, to define her. His only boogeyman, his opponent, is Justin Trudeau. And he does, so behind the scenes, we'll try to keep the trains running on time in terms of money we get, but he, in no way, shape, or form does he think it's beneficial to have that positive relationship. And all I can say is if, somehow the next federal election happens before the next provincial election and the governments change, he's going to have to get some new material pretty quick in terms of his own electoral successes.
Yeah, I think Moe has become more vocal on the federal provincial relationship, and it seems like it's come out of nowhere, but that's great context. I forgot there's a provincial election this year. Sarah or Ginny?
Well, I think Scott Moe's, trying to maybe replicate Danielle Smith to some degree in Alberta, going into an election and making, the federal government the boogeyman in the relationship. Running less against his actual opposition and more against Justin Trudeau and Jagmeet Singh and this evil coalition and, whatever, that they've, contrived to make their enemy out of, which just like a curse on all the houses because of the disservice I think that it does to everyone, like Canadians. Again, going back to Canadians, like we want good government, I think, ultimately and truly. We might go to the ballot box and don't vote for different people, but we all want good government. But you asked me about the healthcare reorganization that was announced in Alberta, and I think we'll have to see. I'm interested to talk with my doctors about the announcement, like when I have my next appointments, to get their take on it, because I think, I'm first and foremost concerned about, them, because we have heard about doctors leaving the province. So I want to make sure that my high quality, excellent doctors stay in the province. And
just for context for our listeners, a couple of days ago, the Premier of Alberta announced that they are completely redoing the healthcare system and creating
it's a reorganization.
Agencies.
It's a reorganization into
big.
Different bodies.
Yeah,
it is big. So we'll see. I'm actually curious about how it compares to BC, where this may or may not be a similar kind of model, but we'll have to see what it rolls out as. They don't have the best track record. The UCP contracted out lab services to this company, and people were waiting like a month to get a simple blood test. And even myself, I had to drive an hour across the city to find the next available appointment. So the track record isn't always the best. And then they also have this huge beef with the healthcare system in general, on the back of COVID and the legacy of, restrictions, and they are so anti-restriction, so anti-common sense, so anti-science in some ways. So we'll see how this all shakes out. But honestly, I think it'll really depend on, how long people end up waiting in the emergency room. Is it a shorter wait or is it a longer wait? Are doctors going to, what will doctors and how they will respond? So I think we'll have to see how this really plays out. It's not something that we're going to see the results of quickly.
Ginny, what about Dougie? What do you tell him?
So I think, we talked a bit already about how he's kind of on top of his relationship with the current federal government. But historically, when the federal government changes parties, the province tends to not be of the same party. There haven't been long periods of time in Canada's history where Ontario and the federal government have had the same partisan stripe. So, and the relationship between the Ford Conservatives and the Poilievre Conservatives is not great. And so if I were him, I would be looking forward to that. And one area, this is a kind of a niche thing, although I think it's really important. Poilievre's first policy announcement on his leadership campaign was about credentialing new immigrants to Canada into areas where we have like major worker shortages, nurses, doctors, engineers, people who like build things, like all the things that we have shortages of. everyone has the story of their taxi driver who's an engineer or a doctor or something from their home country and can't be credentialed to work here, which is just a total travesty. That is one of those federal things that's really provincial jurisdiction, but that Poilievre wants to say something about. So part of his plan is, can I get to bring the provinces to the table and get them to commit to doing that as well? I think if Ford could get ahead of that and stick out an olive branch and say, like, here's what I'm going to do on this front to work with a future Poilievre government to get this done, that could be like a huge political win for both of them, a way for them to kind of build their relationship up a little bit, and a way for Ford to play politically for his future. I don't know if I'm going to hold my breath that will happen, but that would be my advice.
I would tell David Eby to expand $10 a day childcare, which has come to British Columbia, and yet no one can find it. So that would be my advice.
That's a great commercial idea. Like,
it's here, but where?
Well, no, but where?
But where?
It's like a mom in the wilderness trying to find, like, looking in the bushes. Like, is the $10 a day daycare over here? No, sorry.
Although Eby had a great T-shirt at the meeting this week. He said he wore an I Heart Heat Pumps T-shirt, and I was like, "Wow, that's really spicy for this premier." If you know David Eby, so I was pretty proud of him to see him there in a gimmick T-shirt.
Guys, to wrap up with the newest premier, just because I literally saw it. It was up 2 minutes ago. The great advice is like be a brand new premier with not a shit ton of baggage with the government.
Right.
The government. Yeah. I just saw this Premier Canoe made an announcement with his finance minister Adrian Sala and the federal finance minister Chrystia Freeland about investments in the jewel of Canada, Manitoba Hydro. So yeah, it's really it's nice when you're starting at least not at scrapping. You can get a lot of things done.
Yeah.
There is never enough time for these dinner parties. We should know better because dinner parties require way more time. But that's it. That's the end. We're at the end. So we want to thank our guests for their incredible insights, how candid they were at times. We love that. So thank you, Ginny, Sally, Sarah. It was a great conversation. Sans dinner. We'll send you a Skip the Dishes gift card or something to make up for you. But thank you.
Next
we really
time
appreciate you.
With dinner. We also want to thank our producer, Tim Truax. If you love our podcast, please tell your friends about it. Please, please, please. And don't forget to subscribe. You can find us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Come hang out with us next week. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, folks.